So this topic has come up recurringly, and I don't know for you, and maybe it's a sign, the comparison between the Filipino experience and Filipino-American experience, but more specifically, views towards each other.
Mm-hmm.
And
what have you seen? I've seen a lot on social media.
See, you're on social media so much more, so I don't see it. But it's more so conversationally, and maybe because
like
of
with people
media.
Personally in your life.
In my recent clockings, it's people just bringing it up in conversation.
Okay.
But I think throughout my life, when I look back and reflect upon it, I'm like, oh no, it's been heavily apparent. Like, even going back to, elementary school days of, I remember having a new classmate come in from the Philippines in the second grade. His whole family immigrated here when Mount Pinatubo erupted. I think that was 1991.
Oh, wow.
And so...
Did they get was that the reason they were allowed to come here, or were they already coming here?
I don't know if that was because... I think that was the reason. I don't know the exact logistics, but I remember it was because that happened. Whatever reasons or they evaluated, this is the perfect timing. This is the perfect timing to come over.
Yeah.
Let's do it. And they had the means to do it. So why not?
Nice.
But I remember my classmate, he was the only Filipino from the Philippines. And, being from the Bay Area, we always have a good amount of Filipino Americans there. And immediately we all clocked, even at second grade, being 7, 8 years old, his accent. And from the get-go, from jump, I remember not only the Filipinos, but the white people or, non-Filipinos making fun of him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But the Filipino-American kids? Oh,
the Filipino-American kids wrote him hard, even more, even all the way up to 8th grade, where the white
this
people,
poor kid tortured this whole
and
grade
he
school.
took it it makes me sad.
What do you mean, he took it? How did he take it?
Let it roll off.
Did it seem like it was affecting him?
No.
Do you know him now?
We're Facebook friends.
Okay.
I don't want to say his name.
Should bring him on the podcast.
I know. He's such a sweetheart. I think he went to De La Salle. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
But even white girls who at the time, and we would laugh, would call him Fob or oh, so and so with his accent, and would say
white people would call him a Fob.
Yeah, because they heard the Filipinos say it.
Okay.
And they thought it
I've
was
heard
okay.
Filipino, when I was in high school, a Filipino friend of mine was my dad came for something and he was like, oh, your dad looks like my dad, like a fob or whatever.
Did you immediately clock the connotation when you heard that?
I don't remember if I knew what it meant at the time or if he had to explain it, but I feel like I took offense to it. Even though he was comparing both of our dads together, I was like, don't talk about my dad like that.
You said that?
No,
okay.
I didn't say that. I felt that way. I think that was my initial feeling was triggered. I was very protective.
See, at least you were triggered. None of us Filipino Americans were triggered at all. We would just laugh.
Even if it was your parent, though, if someone was making fun of your parents'
maybe
accent.
if somebody would ID my parents, maybe, but I never, maybe because all our parents had an accent.
Yeah.
That it never really came up.
And it's so funny that it never occurred to you guys that you're making fun of him for something that your parents...
Yeah, exactly. Maybe because we because our parents, it's our parents, but this kid, and so he did a good job of hiding it it really did, like...
Was it like daily?
Yes, girl, daily.
Oh my God.
And it's so like hypocritical of us, because we would even put, did you guys do this? Like, when you're doodling on your like books and it's like Pinoy power, Pinay power.
No,
like,
because I didn't have that like identity like at that age.
Oh,
yeah.
It was very strong for us growing up, even though we were strong in minded, but there was at least, at least like 5 or 6 rolling in deep in our like class of 25 to 30. So
I don't think I knew what Pinoy meant till I like watched like a Rex Never Ready like comedy.
Never Ready. I haven't heard that name in hella long. Shout out to Rex Never Ready. He's like pre-Joe Coy. Yes.
Way pre-Joe Coy.
He has some really good jokes.
His stand-ups were hilarious.
Oh my gosh, the Super Friends one. Do you remember that one?
I don't know like if I like know titles, but
good.
we'd always watch it at my aunt's
But
house.
even he would do the Filipino accents and stuff. But like being Filipino American, like I think as I got older, I would ID how much privilege, I don't know if it is the right word for it, because I would see white America view me differently than people who were newly from the Philippines or even had an accent.
Like they accepted you easier?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Yeah, like case in point, this classmate here.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have to deal with those, even though we looked similar, we wouldn't have to deal with those repercussions every day on the daily rag.
This poor child.
I know.
Oh my
And he
God.
would just laugh it off and, maybe come up with a, witty remark or something. And, okay, this is going to sound so horrible. Maybe because I was like... I don't know if he had a crush on me or it made it worse that like his parents would call my parents a balayan, which is, in-laws in Tagalog. And I was like, of course at that age, I'm like, ew, no.
How old were you again?
gross. This is like we met in 2nd grade.
Okay.
But then all the way through, girl, to like 8th grade of like St. Peter Mar days, because you see parents at like functions and everything. It's like, no, don't call me that. No. And then like, and also the fact that like people were making fun of him already too. I didn't want to be associated with that. And
Kids are so mean.
so mean. I know. So just like even looking back at that, I mean, it going back to accents too with us of our parents not teaching us the language.
Yeah. That's exactly why my dad didn't teach me.
Right?
He didn't want me to have an accent.
Because that fear that white America would look at us differently.
That you weren't as American.
Or as American. And part of me is scared that there is some truth to that.
Absolutely. Just seeing like the juxtaposition between like my mom's white family and how they think about non-white people.
Oh, God.
And always referring to them as they, them, instead of like they would never want, like it was so hypocritical because they never wanted like Asian Americans to, or like Black African Americans or Latino Americans. Like they're like, why do they need that like separation? Why do they need that? Like they should all just be Americans. But then when they would talk about them, they would be like, oh, they, them, instead of including them as an American. So it's like, how do you expect them to not keep their own identity and culture when you don't even accept them as being full Americans because they're not white, blonde hair, blue-eyed? So yes, you want them to assimilate, but you will always look at them as the other.
It's like we can't win either way. Even Filipinos and Filipino Americans. I think, I don't want to speak for all Filipinos, but there is that idea of how I've heard, or on TikTok, let's be fair, on TikTok we see how some Filipinos view Filipino Americans of claiming how like, oh, you have it so easy or you don't get it. But case in point of what you're just saying of like, no, we still have our struggles as well. It might not be the same as Filipinos, but
Well, mine's not even the same
nonetheless.
as yours because I'm half white. Like I can, if I told someone I was full white, a lot of people would believe me.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just, there's so many different types of like privilege or circumstances based on like, especially what you look like,
Especially
what you sound like.
And the whole, oh gosh, even Filipinos and Filipino-Americans with, I don't know, I wonder if it's changing now with the white skin versus darker skin, because I think it was a TikTok video where I was seeing they were interviewing people in the Philippines of like white skin or dark skin, you know, just like what is
Well,
your
you go there and
preference?
all the billboards have like mestizo, very fair skin, but also like their hair is dyed not a natural color. They're wearing contacts on like all the TV shows. Like
It's interesting enough, that video that I saw was I think they might have tried to edit it to get more people to say dark skin,
Yeah.
to embrace it. So I like to believe that there is some movement towards
Yeah.
it as well as over here. But even over here, we struggle with that still too, of what we see in the media
Yeah.
of like, you know, it's majority of like light-skinned Filipinos or even light-skinned Asians that are
Light-skinned,
still Eurocentric looking.
anything.
Yeah, any race.
Yeah.
It's like that Eurocentric look.
Well, the fact that so many like different types of cultures have this some form or products to like whitewash your skin or lighten your skin. Lightening products is like such a huge business. It's just telling.
My mom had that papaya soap back in the day. I remember seeing it there. I'm not gonna lie, I tried it.
See,
I was very curious.
I was
like, let's try
opposite
this.
because I like damaged my skin for years trying to get it darker because I felt like it would make me more Filipino if my skin was darker because and I could tan fairly well. Like when I was younger, I was always out in the sun, so my skin was darker. But like when I was older, I like had to make like a conscious effort to like go to tanning beds daily, ruining my skin just, you know, to have darker skin. And I danced hula, and you don't want like a white girl dancing hula. That was very much like my aunt would always be like, why is your skin so white? But then I couldn't get too dark. Like there was like this balance with
Of, like,
the family where it's like, okay, you have to have like some color, but don't be too dark. And the racism that comes with those types of comments is just deep.
Did you ever feel like you had any privilege of being very fair-skinned and Filipino?
I'm sure I have. I don't know if like I've felt it because I feel like a lot of like my dad's family is mixed. A lot of them are either, you know, with Spanish or white, and I don't know. And I'm not saying that I haven't. I'm just saying that I can't think of like, that's something I'd have to think about is like specific experiences where I've had it because I do know that I am privileged just because my skin is lighter. And like everyone always tells me, oh, go to the Philippines and you can become famous there.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you said that. Of like, not even dealing with color, but that statement right there for Filipino American, going back to the Filipino Americans and Filipinos.
And I even said, I don't speak Tagalog. And they're like, that's
Yeah,
fine.
okay.
You can
Yeah.
play the person that doesn't speak Tagalog.
They like, you hear so many aunties and titas, relatives saying, oh, you should go to the Philippines and become an actress. You know, like, I was like, yeah, but we don't speak English. Or we
Actually-
don't just speak Tagalog.
Yeah, going back to like feeling privileged, like I felt different when I went to the Philippines, even though I loved seeing Filipinos everywhere. Like, it brought me so much like joy, and I felt like, oh my God, this is like, you know, the homeland. But people would stare at me everywhere I went. Tyson noticed it. He'd be like, we'd walk into like anywhere, or people would just like look at us like outside. And I don't know if it's because we were like American, or it was just, I don't even know if they knew that I was Filipino. Because when I went to get I have Filipino citizenship, and when we were going through customs, when we got to the Philippines, I went into the Filipino citizen line while the rest of my family was in the other line. And the people, like, I could tell, like, once I was walking up to them, because the line was empty, they were kind of getting like, what's this person doing coming up? And I like handed them my Filipino passport, and they looked at me, and they're like, how did you get this? And I was like, what do you mean?
Did they say that in English or in Tagalog?
English.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, I applied for it, and they're like, you're Filipino? And I was like, yeah. And
even
like,
your last name didn't even clock in their minds.
I don't even know if they looked at my name. I think they just looked at like my picture and then like me. But yeah, so but I know that like when I went to like get my nails done in the Philippines, like the women would ask me like, oh, do you speak Tagalog? And I was like, no. And then they would immediately start talking. So I don't know what exactly.
I mean, they could be saying, oh, ganda, blah, 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 blah,
I don't know. Yeah, there's a tone.
There's always tone, how you can kind of tell.
Yeah.
I had to pick that up growing up. Since I didn't understand any dialect, I could always
or when like your family's talking about you, but then they say your name.
And then they look at you a certain way.
Or just like, Yeah, so it was just very different, like going over there, like just having people stare at you for, I don't know why. But it was different.
I bet.
Like, I don't feel like, oh, like I look like these people. But even when my dad went there, like the stewardess on Pal Air was like, oh, are you mestizo? To my dad. So he's kind of like this ethnically ambiguous man. Like anywhere he goes, like people think he's Chinese, or they think he's Japanese, or they think he's Mexican.
See, that's funny when people say that, because there is no one way Filipinos should look. You know, like 7,000 islands. There's not one way Filipinos look. Even within my family.
Because you hear people say like, oh, you don't look typically Filipino.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
What does that mean? Because like even within my own family and on the Mendoza side of like, wow, it looks like all countries of Asia within there, or even throw in some like Spanish looking, like, or even like when you even throw in my dad's side of the family, who's even indigenous looking, like, or we are indigenous. It's just so, it's all over the place. And see, I see TikTok videos, and I even see people when they're asked of like, oh, I didn't think you were Filipino, or you don't look Filipino, you know?
They tell you that?
No, when I watch people say that to other people, and the people who receive that, it's almost like a badge of honor. Like I see this
that they don't look Filipino?
Yeah. This spark in their eyes. Like, oh yeah, I get that a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
Tyson and I are so opposite, because we feel so like bad like when people say that.
And that's why I always tell you both. I'm like, I totally see the Filipino in you. and see, and that's why I always try to affirm you two, because especially in the Bay Area, where I've been around so many different kinds of Filipinos, and even half or quarter or like whatever fraction of that. So it's like, no, you are still Filipino. You know, I still see our strong blood, you know, flowing, you know, because again, knowing that history, and knowing that like, yeah, there's so many different ways that we can look, and it doesn't make you more or less than, you know. So yeah, that's something I've been
but I feel like to some people it does. It makes you more or less, or if you don't speak the language, it makes you more or less than.
Going back to the Filipinos
culture
versus Filipino-Americans, of that viewpoint towards us, where you'll often see that in TikTok, social media, or even backlash that we've already seen here. I can call that out now too, of like people who I've had to respond to in comments of saying, who are these Filipino-American girls? You're not even Filipino. How dare you talk about, you know, the experience, you know nothing.
But that's what we're talking about, is our experience, or asking questions of like, we're not, and I think that's the hard part of like voicing anything, is that people think you have to speak for everyone, and we can't speak for everyone.
And people forget that.
We can't represent everyone.
It is impossible to do that. Yes, bring in the controversy. Sure, you have your opinion, but no, we're never. That's why I'm very careful when I speak. I try to be mindful of it, of like saying, some Philippines or some people or some of us, or at least I speak from my experience, because when people say those, I don't know whether they're bots or actual people who are pissed off with what we say, I'm like, you know what? Welcome. Bring it. Let's have some discussion. Let's have some open dialogue, because I am always open and willing to hear a perspective, because I may not know that perspective.
Yeah. I think it's the tone, though, that I have a problem with. That, like, how dare we even try and attempt to talk about anything when we also have an experience? It might not be the same experience as yours. It might not be better. It might not be worse, but it's our experience. I remember I wrote this article for Pop Sugar about being half white and like half Filipino, and what my experience was, what I went through, what my feelings were. And so many people, I think, Filipino or white, not mixed. They were either or, because a lot of the mixed people were like, thank you for like voicing what I've felt like my entire life. But a lot of white people or Filipino people were like telling me how I should feel about my experiences, which I don't understand.
So annoying.
I don't understand that at all. So we are just speaking about our experiences, questioning like what other experiences people have as well, and which is why I love that we are bringing guests on to, have other people's perspectives on different things. But saying like, how dare these people try and like,
I know. I was like, is that what you say on your podcast? How about you start a podcast, ma'am? Or miss?
Yeah.
It's so annoying. But you know what? I know it comes with the territory with social media.
Yeah.
It makes it easier nowadays just to hide behind a screen and like type
and
it.
who might be talking to a bot.
Might be a bot. But I think that's why it's just creating such a more divisive world here, rather than like, this is what my hopes, at least like our hopes for like podcasts and having these conversations and bringing people on, is to have these conversations. And sometimes these conversations are difficult, so I would love,
or awkward, or like,
uncomfortable, because it's like, in order for us to grow and learn, we have to be uncomfortable.
Because I always have anxiety, I think, talking about the Filipino versus the Filipino-American experience, based on like what I've seen other people talk about and how they're trashed for like even bringing it up.
What have you seen? Can you think of anything where people have been trashed for saying something?
Or just like, I think other Filipino-American podcasters talking about how like there's this whole side of like Filipino TikTok or social media where, they talk about Filipino Americans and, they're not really Filipino. Or that video where Filipino Americans, it wasn't BuzzFeed, it was another company it was Filipino Americans like attempting to say like Filipino phrases, and they weren't doing it well because they didn't speak Tagalog. And the comments that people made on that were like, they should be ashamed of themselves. Like they're not real Filipinos. They're just brown Americans. It's not taking into context what we've talked about before of what our parents went through and why they didn't teach us. It's not because they were ashamed of their culture. It's because they didn't have the privilege that like people who didn't have an accent had in this country. And I'm not going to apologize or feel bad about that when like my dad or our parents or any of our ancestors, what they went through to come here to give us a better life, what they thought was a better life.
It's because I think people are so quick to judge, especially watching those videos of like, it might, I can't speak for Filipinos watching that, of almost making fun of them, you know, of like, oh, you know, they don't.
Making fun of
Filipinos or what the language is because it's supposed to be said a certain way. So I wonder what that feels like to be a Filipino and hearing someone who looks like you essentially butcher your language. And if they're automatically judging, like you said, because they don't know context, they don't know the history that we went through. But just seeing that, I wonder what that does to them.
Well, then there's that other side of like how you were saying in the beginning of how you were making fun of this little kid who had an accent. And it's, you know, it's essentially like what our parents went through and why they didn't want us to have one. They didn't want us to get made fun of.
Like that. It's
a lot. Yeah.
It's so much to wrap around because seeing it from both sides now, especially as adults, I mean, I wish I can go back and like, you know, turn it around, but obviously we can't. But, you know, this is why like it starts with our generation, you know, of like telling our children one day.
But I wonder where it's like learned, you know, because like kids, you know, like why is it just because it sounded different or it sounded like weird that like how that came about?
I think different. Like, I think a lot of people, no matter what context we're talking about, of what race, ethnicity, or any of that, anything different, people are always going to irk, you know, like red flag, and kids are cruel, like we said, and immediate responses make fun, you know, whether it's, you know, disability, religion, anything different. Yeah. It's just, and then there adds more complexity when it becomes Filipinos and Filipino-Americans, because you do share somewhat of an identity together. It just gets more and more like complex within it. So I'm looking forward to like unpacking this seminar of a topic even more, and especially when we have guests who are from the Philippines.
I think having their perspective.
Yes. Yeah. And even like immigrating here at different points in their lives too. So I'm looking forward to that, because I like already thinking in my head of like family members also. And again, made fun of them too. I feel so bad. I'm like, I laugh now, but this is a nervous laugh. This is a nervous laugh of like, wow, I can't believe we did that. Yeah. And never apologized.
So like aunties or uncles or your parents?
Cousins.
Oh, cousins. Yeah. Okay, that came.
Cousins. Yeah.
But you guys never made fun of like the older generation?
No.
Interesting.
I know, right? So that is a good question. Why do you think that is?
That you didn't like, I mean, would you get in trouble? Like, would you get like the slipper, the chinela, or the bell?
Slipper or the bell?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably, maybe that's an undergirding reason. But also, I think with kids, you can get away with it more. Because
Did they ever tell on you to their parents?
No. That's why.
I wonder also I wonder if that little boy's parents ever knew that you guys made fun of him. Probably, or if he just internalized everything.
I think he internalized everything.
Oh, God.
My spidey senses tell me that I think he internalized everything.
Yeah.
Even my cousins that, you know, immigrated here at a young age, I think they internalized it.
Yeah. Because you never got in trouble for it,
we would never get in trouble. And I think even for our family, I don't think uncles or aunties aren't even I don't think I just sat there and watched, but that's just as bad, because I didn't say anything. I didn't step up. I just laughed. But yeah, the uncles and aunties wouldn't do anything.
So they probably didn't know.
No.
Do you think you would get in trouble if they found out?
I think if my parents clocked that, whether it was a cousin or a friend that was happening to, felt bad and could see it, then they would. But I don't think that was ever present, or they just hid it well, or maybe...
Why do you think you guys didn't make fun of, like, the elders?
The elders, I think there's that level of respect.
Yeah. That's huge.
It's huge in our
culture.
community, but also because it was just like, they're like my parents.
Yeah.
Like my parents.
It felt like felt normal, but not for
normal.
like a child
Exactly.
to have.
Because I knew my parents had a slight accent, and I was like, oh yeah, that's just like our parents. But what's funny now is like, damn, did my parents have this thick of an accent back then as they do now?
That's so
Or
funny.
did it just get thicker? I don't know.
It's so funny because at my wedding, my dad gave a speech, and it was like really long because he was really nervous. And a lot of Tyson's family came up to me after and was like, oh, I didn't realize your dad had such a thick Filipino accent. And I was like, I didn't either, because when he gets nervous, it gets thicker. But yeah, I don't think I've ever noticed it, or maybe he tried not to have, or maybe he just didn't have a thick, I don't know. He obviously does have one when he's nervous.
But also maybe because I just got I was so used to it when I was younger, hearing my parents every day, because my friends told me in high school, Marie, your mom has such a cute, thick accent. And I was like, really? And I never noticed until I think until I went to college and came back and left, enough time had passed. I was like, oh, I hear it now. Even more so now, as I think they're getting older, slowing down a little bit too. My dad just did a eulogy for his best friend who had passed away. Love their family. So they were so close to ours. But I basically wrote that eulogy for him. He helped me along the way, but he's like, I had really Dad, I'm going to ask you all the questions while I write this for you. But since I couldn't be there, I watched the live stream of it, his eulogy. And I was so proud of him because I could hear him struggle, even though he was reading it. But I always have to remind myself, oh my gosh, this is his second language.
Yeah.
And just to see him get through that 15 minutes of speaking in English.
That's a long time. That's a long time for... English is my only language, and that's a long time for
I know. So I was like, Dad, I'm so proud of you. You did such a good job. And my mom was on that text thread, and she was like, yeah, your dad spent the past 3 days rehearsing and practicing.
How cute.
Especially because, I was like, Dad, I had coaching sessions with him because I was like, this is what I do with my colleagues, and, and I'm taking class. I think it's kismet of let me coach you through this. Where to pause, hold for laugh. This is a joke here. But I was like, oh, hearing it now, I'm just like, okay, I can make amends now with the accent. And looking back at that childhood friend and even cousins, I'm like, note to self, anytime anybody who has an accent or is new and how hard that, plight is of coming here, I'm like, no, you are speaking, and you are speaking beautifully.
Yeah, and you know more languages than I do.
More than I do. Basically, yes. You are therefore have a higher IQ than I do because you can speak in multiple languages.
Yes.